phone, the moon is rising and you're raising my heart. Why are you waiting? Is it way too hard?
They called it a modern-day Camelot, a sprawling ranch where a punk rock princess traded stilettos for boots, and a country king found his forever. But every paradise hides a fracture line, and when the vows faded, the very soil they consecrated became the center of a heartbreak no one saw coming. In the heart of Oklahoma, where rolling hills stretch toward wide skies and forests edge along farmland, there is a place that once seemed touched by destiny. This was 10 Point Ranch, a sprawling 10,000-acre property that carried with it the mythic air of a modern-day Camelot. For country music superstar Blake Shelton, it was far more than real estate. It was home, his inheritance of spirit and soil, a sanctuary carved out of red earth and oak groves. For Gwen Stefani, the Californian rock star whose world had been palm trees and neon lights, it became the place where she discovered another self, one she hadn't known she was missing. Their love, their family, and their vision of forever grew from this land. And in the end, it was also where the cracks began to show, where a dream turned into a battlefield. The story of the ranch is as much a story of identity as it is of romance. For Shelton, Oklahoma had always been more than a state. It was an anchor. Born and raised on its plains, he began assembling 10 Point Ranch piece by piece, buying parcels of land until his holdings stretched into a kingdom. Every dollar he made from his music, every quiet moment between tours, seemed to funnel back into this project. He poured his energy into building ponds, planting fields, and cultivating an escape from the glare of fame. Long before anyone thought of it as a symbol of celebrity love, 10 Point Ranch was simply his, a place where he could fish in peace, drive his tractor without interruption, and feel the comfort of home. When Gwen Stefani entered his life, she was an unlikely fit for that world. Known globally as the punk-inspired frontwoman of No Doubt, a fashion icon with platinum hair and red lips, her life had unfolded in Southern California's fast lanes. She was a city girl with roots in Los Angeles, surrounded by palm trees and paparazzi, raised on ska rhythms rather than country twang. But love has a way of defying expectation. Drawn together in the aftermath of heartbreak, both recovering from painful divorces, Gwen and Blake's romance unfolded under the spotlight, fascinating fans who couldn't have imagined a more surprising pairing. And yet, it worked. The ranch became their proving ground. It was here, under the Oklahoma sun, that Gwen traded stilettos for camo pants, where her kids, Kingston, Zuma, and Apollo, ran through fields instead of down Hollywood streets. She learned to fish, to drive a truck, to saddle up a horse. The woman who once sang of West Coast heartbreak now spoke openly about finding peace in a wide-open sky. "I want to do everything with him every day," she said in one interview. "Perform, write songs, hang out, watch TV, whatever it is, I'm all about Blake." Together, they transformed the ranch from Shelton's private sanctuary into a shared dream. They built a massive, multi-million-dollar mansion designed for their blended family. They poured love into a small chapel with their own hands, a place they consecrated with vows on their wedding day. Photographs of their time there showed a life that seemed idyllic. Blake behind the wheel of a seed-spreading tractor. Gwen walking behind him in designer rain boots, her laugh bright in the Oklahoma dirt. The contrast between them only made the story richer. He was a country boy happiest on his land. She was a pop star who found herself willing to reinvent her identity for him. But fairy tales often hide fault lines, and behind the public smiles, a deeper conflict began to stir. The issue was not fame, nor their careers, but something much more personal. What 10 Point Ranch actually represented. For Blake, it had always been his heartland, his personal refuge. Gwen, however, saw it differently. For her, the ranch was their home, the foundation of the new family life she had built with her sons and with Blake. That difference in perception, sanctuary for him, family hearth for her, was subtle but crucial. It was the seed of discord that would eventually grow into something irreconcilable. The legal questions surrounding the property only complicated matters. Much of the land had been Shelton's long before Gwen entered the picture, acquired piece by piece with his own earnings. By law, that meant the ranch itself was largely his separate property. But the mansion they had built together, the home at the center of their blended life, was different. Paid for with shared wealth during their marriage, it was a marital asset, legally tied to both of them. How do you divide a house built on land that only one partner owns? How do you separate the emotional significance of a place that had become central to their identity as a couple? As insiders later revealed, this wasn't just about dividing assets. This was about memories, family, and the meaning of home itself. For Gwen, to walk away from the ranch would feel like admitting that the last decade of her life, the sacrifices she had made to blend her California roots with his Oklahoma world, had been for nothing. For Blake, the fear was existential. The idea of being forced to sell his ancestral sanctuary, of losing the land that defined him, was unbearable. To him, the ranch wasn't just property. It was a part of his soul. In their final months together, those tensions only sharpened. Sources close to the couple described how arguments over the ranch became a symbol of their deeper disagreements. Gwen reportedly pressed for the idea of the ranch as a family home, a legacy for her children as much as his. Blake, deep down, could never quite let go of the sense that this was his land, and that she was a guest he had invited into his world. What had once been a paradise became a battlefield. It could easily have ended in a brutal court fight. With millions at stake, lawyers were prepared for a war that might have forced a sale, splitting the profits, but destroying the sanctity of the land in the process. Friends braced themselves for years of bitter conflict. And then, in a move that surprised nearly everyone, Gwen made a decision that shifted the entire outcome. She chose to walk away. By all accounts, she could have fought. She could have claimed her share of the mansion, insisted on a sale, or forced Blake to buy her out at enormous cost. The law would have given her leverage, and the fight could have dragged on indefinitely. But in the end, she did not. Instead, she made the quiet, painful choice to relinquish her claim. Those close to her described it as an act of self-preservation as much as selflessness. Without Blake, the ranch no longer represented a dream. It had become a prison, filled with ghosts of a life that was gone. Every corner, every fence line, every glance at the chapel would be a reminder of what she had lost. To stay and fight would mean chaining herself to a memory with no future. To let go meant choosing peace. The ranch was only a paradise because of the dream she shared with Blake, one insider explained. Without him, it wasn't paradise anymore. And so the decision was made. Blake Shelton kept 10 Point Ranch, the land, the mansion, the chapel, the memories. From one perspective, he won. The property that had been his greatest fear to lose remained intact, still his sanctuary. But it was a bittersweet victory. For all its sprawling acres and beautiful sunsets, the ranch was now quiet, missing the laughter of Gwen and her sons, missing the family life they had once built there. He was, in a sense, king of a kingdom that no longer had a queen. For Gwen, the loss was just as sharp, but perhaps more freeing. By letting go, she freed herself from the shadow of what once was. She preserved the love story as a chapter of beauty, rather than dragging it into ugliness. The ranch would forever hold a piece of her story, but it would no longer define her future. Together, they transformed the ranch from Shelton's private sanctuary into a shared dream. They built a massive, multi-million-dollar mansion designed for their blended family. The house was not just walls and windows, but a statement, a physical expression of their unity. Gwen filled the rooms with her signature style, mixing California brightness with rustic charm. While Blake ensured the space echoed his roots in the soil. It was a place where their worlds met halfway, a kind of cultural handshake between Los Angeles glamour and Oklahoma grit. And then, on a hill not far from the mansion, they erected a chapel. This small, white building, hand-built with their own vision, became the heart of their love story. Here, they exchanged vows in front of family and close friends, sealing their bond in a deeply personal way. The chapel was more than an altar. It was a symbol of permanence. They hadn't just chosen to marry. They had chosen to anchor that promise to the very land they stood on. For fans watching from afar, it was a fairy tale. For the couple, it felt like destiny. But time and routine have a way of testing even the most magical places. As seasons passed, subtle differences began to emerge. The very land that had brought them together also magnified their contrasts. For Blake, the ranch was an eternal refuge, a place to escape from the pressures of celebrity and the constant noise of touring. He saw its fields and streams as his true inheritance, something sacred to his identity. Gwen, however, looked at the ranch through a different lens. To her, it was their home, a family hub where her sons could grow, where a new chapter of her life could unfold. It was where she had stepped away from the image of the California pop star and embraced a quieter, more grounded version of herself. This difference in vision was subtle, but profound. For Blake, the ranch would always first and foremost be his sanctuary, his land. Gwen believed it was a shared kingdom, a testament to their life as a blended family. These conflicting definitions of home created an invisible fault line. Neither perspective was wrong, but together they created a tension that no amount of romantic photos or family holidays could fully conceal. Complicating matters were the legal realities. While Blake owned most of the acreage long before his marriage to Gwen, making it his separate, premarital property, the mansion stood as a marital asset. It had been paid for with both of their fortunes during their time together, and by law, it belonged to them equally. This contradiction created a puzzle as emotional as it was legal. How could they separate a house from the land beneath it? To lawyers, it was a complex problem to solve. To Blake and Gwen, it was a ticking time bomb, a question that held both financial and emotional stakes. Friends and insiders later admitted that discussions about the property became increasingly fraught. Gwen viewed the mansion as her children's home, a safe place they had grown attached to, a setting where they had bonded with their stepfather. To her, walking away would mean erasing a decade of their lives and unraveling the fabric of their shared memories. Blake, meanwhile, feared losing the sanctuary he had cultivated since his youth. The idea of being forced to sell or divide 10 Point Ranch was, for him, an existential dread. He could always build another house, but the land, that land was irreplaceable. What had once been their shared Eden began to morph into a battlefield. Small disagreements grew sharper, their edges cutting deeper than either anticipated. To outsiders, they still appeared blissful. The picture of an unlikely love story made real. But behind the walls of the mansion, the arguments over the ranch symbolized something deeper. Two visions of life together that had drifted out of alignment. When separation became inevitable, many feared the ranch would become the focal point of a bitter legal war. Attorneys prepared for a protracted battle that could drag on for years, draining money, time, and peace of mind. It seemed almost certain that the ranch, the very place that had symbolized their union, would be broken apart in the process. And then came Gwen's decision. Quietly, and to the surprise of those closest to her, she chose not to fight. She could have pushed for a sale, demanded her share, or dragged the matter into court. She had every right to, but instead, she stepped back. Insiders described her choice as both heartbreaking and liberating. Without Blake, the ranch no longer felt like a dream. It was filled with ghosts. The chapel where vows were exchanged. the fields where children played, the house where laughter once echoed. To remain tethered to the property would mean living every day in the shadow of what was lost. For Gwen, relinquishing her claim wasn't about surrender. It was about survival. By walking away, she allowed herself to close a chapter without letting it decay into bitterness. For Blake, the outcome was a victory, though a complicated one. He retained 10 Point Ranch, the house, the chapel, the fields, all intact. He had avoided his greatest fear, losing the land that defined him. But the triumph was bittersweet. The ranch was his, yet the life it once held was gone. The mansion stood, but the family that made it a home had dispersed. The chapel still overlooked the hills, but the promise once spoken inside it had dissolved into memory. In the end, the fate of 10 Point Ranch became the ultimate symbol of their relationship. A breathtaking dream, a union of opposites, and finally, a reminder of the profound cost of love when it falls apart. It showed how deeply entwined their lives had become, how land and love had fused into one inseparable thing. And it revealed the hardest truth of all, that sometimes paradise only exists when shared. Alone, it is nothing more than empty land. So Blake Shelton remains at 10 Point Ranch, holding on to the place that has always been a part of him. Gwen Stefani has returned to California, to her music, her fashion, her own identity. Their love story, once lived out under Oklahoma skies, is now part of history. The ranch stands as a monument not just to their union but to its ending, a reminder that even the most unlikely fairy tales carry with them a human cost. Because in the end, the question lingers like a whisper through the hills and woodlands. What is paradise when you are the only one left to walk it?